Hey, I'm Esther Zuckerman.
And I'm Ashley Fetters.
And we're going to be chatting with you weekly about girls this season. So I think one of the main themes of this episode is sort of checking back in on the characters. And the truth of the matter is, they haven't gone very far. This episode opens with a very interesting parallel back to the pilot. The pilot featured this dinner scene with Hannah and her parents, and in the pilot they tell her, sorry, we're cutting you off. And here they're sending her off to Iowa, to the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Even in the moments when superficially it didn't seem like you were supporting me, I know that you were supporting me in your own way.
This time Adam joins them at the dinner. They're proud of her, but she's changed and yet she's not, because she toasts her parents and she's like, you were supportive even when you outwardly weren't supportive. I know you were secretly supportive. This very sort
even
of immature.
Criticisms were just a way of recognizing that I have talent.
Yeah.
Essentially the message we're getting, right?
Yeah, which, you know, is still a very immature. She has a direct path. Actually, Adam says something like, the next step in a series of random steps.
Hannah.
Which, I don't know if that speaks to, on a meta level, some of the writing on the show, whether some of the moves that they're making are more random rather than character driven, or whether that is really truly a character choice. But they're still very much in this sort of quote unquote millennial state.
When this show began in 2012 with the first season,
Yeah.
I feel like I knew a lot of people at the time who said, this is almost too close to home for me.
Yeah.
These are characters who are lonely and lost and scared and directionless, don't know what to do with themselves, don't know what direction they're headed. And it was almost too much to handle, I think, at that point in our lives,
Yeah.
right? But, they're 4 years out of college now, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like most of the people who were saying these things about the show at the time are older and feel a little more stable than they did at the time, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we're more stable. I don't feel like we can say the same thing about the characters.
Can you just give me 1 second? Please, let me just gather my thoughts. I'm like,
I'm not that much older than you, and all my friends have it together.
We get that with Jess a little bit too. Jessa has been working for this photographer, and she shows up to her house, and the photographer's daughter is played by Natasha Lyonne. Rails on Jessa about, everyone who's, I think she says 5 years younger than me.
Is too entitled and
Yeah.
I got handed a trophy at the end of every soccer game, and it's That's sort of I feel like that's sort of the rote knock against millennials at this point. Right?
Exactly. It's like the same entitlement message that you hear, and that I think has been disproven and analyzed and overanalyzed, and probably every generation says about the next generation.
And to me that stood out as one of those very characteristic girls moments in which it feels less like a character talking and more like the writer's room has just gotten a megaphone into the show.
But on the other hand, is speaking from the perspective of the show, does she have a point? I mean, these girls haven't really matured or changed or anything.
So I think it's fair to say then that looking at this episode, there's a lot of distinct and I would say intentional parallels with the first episode of the series.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
There's a lot of just symmetry between the images that we see, right? Especially with the dinner scene, like you mentioned. And I think that speaks to the fact that their situations have matured, whereas maybe they haven't so much.
We here as viewers have been watching these young women floundering for 3 seasons, going on 4 seasons. Do we ever want them to mature? Do we want them that much? Do we want them to change?
And that's another question that sort of lends itself to a discussion of the structure of the show, really. I think there's a real tension between, is this a comedy and is this a drama?
Yeah.
Technically it is billed as a comedy, but there's enough character development that it seems like sometimes there is, real drama happening. But on the other hand, it could be a Seinfeld where our characters just don't learn anything.
Let's talk about the most cringeworthy moment of this episode.
Cringe of the week.
Cringe of the week. Marnie does a jazz brunch.
There are always Marnie moments.
So she and Desi do this jazz brunch, which honestly seems like a terrible gig. It's also one of the most horrifying moments because Marnie sings. I don't know if you watched Peter Pan live, but I certainly did. And Allison Williams has a very nice voice. It's very lovely.
Yes.
And they've said this in interviews, but she makes it nasally and whiny for the purpose of singing as Marnie. Marnie hits all the notes, but Marnie is trying so hard.
So I would say that's probably the most cringe-worthy moment of this episode, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you might say it's Marnie's other moment. Marnie engages in some butt stuff?
Butt stuff!
Butt stuff! But I think that was more shocking rather than cringeworthy. Sure. It is a good segue into talking about the sex on the show.
I feel like that's something that we have to talk about every time we watch Girls is, you know, there's this very controversial and very blunt portrayal of sex in a lot of the episodes, and we saw that this week for sure.
Because I think when the show started, it was very much about, you know, one of the talking points was this is something that's going to feature real sex and
not real sex, but real looking sex.
Real looking sex, yeah, not real
right.
sex, not actual real sex, but real looking sex, awkward sex. And I feel like, you know, that was the first shot of Marnie that we saw in this episode, and that was definitely one of the shows. Whoa, we're gonna shock you with this.
Every now and again, there is that girl's sex moment that you just go, whoa.
Yeah.
I just had that moment.
But the second instance of sex on the show was a lot more tame. We sort of cut back at the very end of the episode to Hannah and Adam, previously the most adventurous couple on the show in that way, or individually or together, having sort of very boring missionary sex, and that was whereas the Marnie moment was much more for shock value. That was used for storytelling, and Hannah's relationship with Adam has been one of the defining things of basically all of the seasons.
Yeah.
But right now it's undergoing some weird tension.
It seems, especially in that sex scene, it looks like that stalemate has led to sort of a rut or a routine. And that's, you know, it's a new place for them. But also, I think you're getting at something with, you know, the idea that everybody in this show is sort of in a routine or like in a rut.
So next week, we're obviously looking forward to Hannah going to Iowa, and how she fares there, which, gonna guess, not great. But also what that means for her and Adam's relationship. At the last moments, what we have is Hannah is waking up to go early in the morning. Adam is still asleep. Hannah doesn't try very hard to wake him up at all. She just sort of allows him to sleep. And she's downstairs getting in the car with her parents, and he's sort of staring out the window.
What was with Adam standing in the window and not doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Adam run after Hannah in the past, but this time he didn't. He just stood there.
Yeah, it does seem like a distinct moment in this timeline of Adam and Hannah and this timeline of Girls. So I guess we'll find out more next week. So a week from now, we will return with another chat about episode 2 of season 4.
Let us know what you want to hear. Respond in the comments. Thank you.
We'll see you next week.